There are so many works of art at the Huntington. They're tiny, enormous, fragile, tough, very old, and almost new. And while they differ in many ways, they have one thing in common. They all have a story to tell. To find those stories, you have to ask questions. What, why, and how are the words for today? Join us as we explore some of the art at the Huntington and let the questions begin. This is a painting called The Long Leg by Edward Hopper. It's a very interesting painting because of the colors. Look how bright the colors are. To me, it looks like it's a really, really bright summer day. But if you look really carefully at the painting, you notice there's no people, not even in the sailboat. And to me, that's curious. It makes me wonder what's happening. And sometimes I think the best art is a little bit of a mystery.
One of my favorite displays is our Frederic church painting, Chimborazo, which is a glorious, huge painting of South America, painted in 1864. The way that Church himself displayed paintings, he would send out these big paintings like Chimborazo on tour. It was sort of like going to the movies in the 19th century. And he would put the painting in a darkened room, light it very dramatically, and people would actually pay 25 cents to come in and take a look at that painting.
So the Huntington acquired a sculpture by an artist named Harriet Hosmer called Zenobia in Chains. The sculpture is marble. It weighs 2,000 pounds. But in California, you have to be very careful to make sure that objects like sculpture are safe in case of earthquake. So we had a team of conservators build a cage around her, tip her on her side, insert a steel peg in the bottom, tip her back up, and then the steel peg went into something called an isolator base, which is a big steel framework on giant springs, so that in the case of an earthquake, the sculpture and the base would move slightly instead of having the sculpture tip off. So that's one example of the scale of the engineering that can go into making objects safe.
This is a bust, which is a sculpture of just somebody's head, and not even her shoulders, of a woman named Elizabeth Larocque by an artist named Davidson. And if you look at the shape of her head, maybe in contrast to the shape of my head, they're a little different. And look at the tone of her skin compared to the tone of my skin. She was made of limestone. Does she remind you of any other culture or time or place? She was sculpted right about the time the Egyptian tombs were being discovered. And there was something called Egyptomania, which was a fascination with all things Egypt. And if you look carefully at her, you might see some things that remind you of Egypt. One of the things that artists do is they're influenced by other cultures. If you keep your eyes out when you visit, you might find some of them.
You might wonder why furniture is in a museum. Well, this chair is very different from the kind of chairs you would have in your house, although it was a functional piece of furniture when it was designed. And in the late 19th century, in the 1890s, specifically in Belgium and in France, the Art Nouveau movement was born. And Art Nouveau, meaning new art, emphasized asymmetrical compositions of curvilinear forms, very sinuous lines, of organic shapes that intertwine with one another, and this was very new at the time. A good 10 years before that, this chair was designed, so it is the very first example of this kind of Art Nouveau movement that appears.
Paul Landecker lived in Echo Park in Los Angeles and would often go into the high desert and make these beautiful landscapes featuring mountains and the high desert topography. And one of the things that I love about Landecker's work is the way that he captured light falling on these textured mountains so that you can see all of the gullies created by wind and by water over millennia. You have a wonderful sense of daylight here, and then the sun crowns the mountain.
Landecker did wood engraving, so it's a process where he's cutting into a block of wood with very sharp tools, then coating it with ink, pressing the paper against the block of wood, and then pulling an impression.
This is an abstract painting by an artist named Sam Francis. It's called Free Floating Clouds. It's one of the largest paintings in the collection. When I look at a painting like this, a lot of questions come to my mind. I think maybe the first question might be, what's it about? Or how did the artist paint something so large? Did he walk on it? Did it hang on a wall? Another question I ponder is, what color did he start with first? There's blue and green and red, and then all of a sudden something that just looked like a bunch of splatters starts to look like things to me. I think one of the neatest things that abstract painting can do is make you wonder. A lot of times people will say, well, I could paint that. Well, could you?